The explosion tore through the cargo bay like an angry beast. Jake Morrison felt the ship shake violently beneath his feet as alarms screamed through every corridor. He grabbed onto a support beam as the vessel tilted sideways, throwing equipment and supplies across the room. All hands to escape pods. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through the intercom, barely audible over the chaos. "We're going down." Jake ran toward the nearest escape pod station, his heart pounding in his chest. The transport vessel had been on a routine supply run to the outer colonies when the Zalthran Collective appeared out of nowhere. Their attack was swift and brutal. 3 missiles hit before anyone could react. The corridor filled with smoke. Jake could barely see 3 feet ahead. He heard screaming from somewhere behind him, but when he turned back, a secondary explosion knocked him off his feet. His head hit the metal floor hard. Stars burst across his vision. When Jake opened his eyes, everything was quiet. Too quiet. He lay on his back, staring up at a purple sky through a massive hole in the ship's hull. His ears rang. His shoulder throbbed with pain. Slowly, carefully, he sat up and looked around. The ship had crashed on a planet. Half of it was buried in dark soil, the other half twisted and burning. Jake pulled himself to his feet and stumbled through the wreckage. He called out for survivors, his voice hoarse and weak. "Rodriguez! Chen! Anyone!" No response came. Jake searched for 2 hours, climbing through destroyed sections and checking every body he found. All 12 of his crewmates were dead. Some had died in the initial attack. Others had perished in the crash. Jake was alone. He salvaged what he could from the wreckage. A damaged survival kit with basic medical supplies. A plasma pistol with only 3 charges left. Some ration bars. A torn sleeping bag. A water filter. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. The planet around him looked dangerous. Thick jungle spread in every direction, with strange plants that seemed to move on their own. In the distance, something roared. It sounded big and angry. Jake needed shelter before nightfall dawned. He found a cave system about a mile from the crash site. The entrance was narrow, but the inside opened into a larger space. Jake checked for animals or other threats, then set up his small camp. His shoulder still hurt, but he wrapped it as best he could with supplies from the kit dot as darkness fell. Jake sat at the cave entrance and stared out at the alien world. He had no idea where he was. The navigation system had died in the crash. His communicator only produced static. For all he knew, he was the only human within 100 light-years far above the planet's surface. In an orbiting station, Commander Vexlor watched his display screen with mild interest. The reptilian Drexian officer had detected the crash 3 hours ago. His job was to monitor Kraveth 7, a planet used by multiple alien species as a hunting preserve and training ground. "Sir, should we send a recovery team?" asked his assistant, a young officer named Quentis. Vexler's forked tongue flickered out as he studied the biological scan data. "For a human? A Tier 7 species?" He made a dismissive gesture with his clawed hand. "Look at the data. Weak bones. Poor senses. No natural weapons. No adaptations for this environment. But sir, the Galactic Council protocols state, the protocols apply to protected zones." Vexler interrupted. "Kraveth 7 is neutral space. The survival games have clear rules. No interference." He turned back to his screen. "Besides, I give the humans 72 hours at most. The night predators will find him soon enough." Quentis looked uncomfortable, but didn't argue further. He had learned not to question the commander's decisions. On another part of the station, 3 different alien hunting parties picked up the crash signal. The krill warriors, insectoid creatures with razor-sharp claws and armor-plated bodies, discussed the human briefly before dismissing him as irrelevant. Their leader, Ziktar, had hunted on dozens of worlds. A weak mammal wasn't worth his time. The Thorn mercenaries, massive bear-like beings with enhanced strength, barely registered the human's presence. Their leader Grath was tracking a more dangerous target, a armored beast called a thunder lizard. Killing that would bring glory and profit, but the human's presence didn't go completely unnoticed. Automated camera drones, scattered across the planet to record the hunts for entertainment networks, adjusted their programming. A new contestant had entered the games. The broadcasts would include him, at least until something killed him, across 5-star systems, being settled in to watch their screens. The survival games of Crevice 7 were always popular. Watching skilled hunters track dangerous prey satisfied some primal instinct that civilized society usually kept buried. The human was just a minor footnote, an unexpected bonus, a tragedy waiting to happen. Nobody expected him to last the night. Jake didn't sleep much during those first dark hours. Every sound outside the cave made him tense. Something with too many legs crawled past the entrance at one point. Later, he heard wings flapping overhead, accompanied by shrieks that made his blood run cold. But morning came, and Jake was still alive. He drank some water, ate half a ration bar, and ventured out to explore his surroundings. The plasma pistol stayed in his hand at all times. The jungle was dense and humid. Strange plants grew everywhere, some with thorns as long as his finger. Jake moved slowly and carefully, watching where he stepped. He found a stream with clear water and refilled his bottle after running it through the filter. He also found tracks. Big tracks. Something heavy had walked through the mud near the stream recently. Jake studied the prints, trying to understand what made them. 4 toes, claws, probably a predator. He made a note to avoid this area at dawn and dusk, when predators typically hunted by midday. Jake had covered about 3 miles in a circle around his cave. He found several types of fruit that might be edible, though he'd need to test them carefully. He spotted what looked like rabbit-sized creatures in the underbrush, which meant potential food if he could catch them. He also found something else. Scorch marks on trees. Plasma burns. Other hunters were on this planet, and they had advanced weapons. Jake wasn't just alone. He was in a hunting ground, and he had no idea if he was a hunter or prey. That night, sitting in his cave again, Jake made a decision. He couldn't just hide and hope for rescue. The crash had happened in the middle of nowhere. Even if someone was looking for him, it would take weeks or months to search this area of space. He had to survive. And to survive, he needed to learn everything about this planet and the things that lived on it. He didn't know that millions of eyes were watching him. He didn't know about the bets being placed on how long he'd last. He didn't know that the galaxy had already written him off as dead. Jake Morrison was underestimated. But he was still breathing. And every breath was an act of defiance against a universe that expected him to fail. 3 days passed on Crevice 7, and Jake Morrison was still alive. This confused Commander Vexlor more than he wanted to admit. He watched the monitoring screens as the human moved through the jungle with growing caution and intelligence. "He's cataloging plants," Quinas observed, pointing at the display. "Look, he's taking samples and organizing them near his shelter." Vexler leaned closer. The human had created a simple system using torn pieces of his uniform. Red cloth meant dangerous. Yellow meant unknown. Green meant safe. Already, a dozen plant samples lay arranged outside the cave entrance. "Interesting," Vexler admitted. "Most species panic in the first week. They make desperate attempts to signal for help or try to repair their ship. But this human is adapting." Jake had indeed adapted his thinking. On day 2, he'd realized that rescue might never come. On day 3, he accepted it. Now he focused on survival with a clarity that surprised even himself. The panic and grief were still there, buried deep, but he couldn't afford to feel them. Not yet. Not if he wanted to live. He'd built primitive tools using materials from the crashed ship. A knife made from a hull panel, a spear from a support rod, a crude hammer from a piece of machinery. His engineering training, meant for maintaining ship systems, now helped him create survival equipment. The water situation was stable. He'd found 3 clean streams within walking distance. Food was harder. The fruits he'd tested were mostly safe, but they didn't provide enough calories. He needed protein. That meant hunting. Jake had set up simple snares near animal trails. So far, he'd caught nothing, but he was learning. Each empty trap taught him something about the local wildlife's behavior. They were smart and cautious, avoiding obvious dangers. On day 4, everything changed. Ziktar, the young krill warrior, had grown bored with hunting the local megafauna. The thunder lizards and razorhawks provided no real challenge anymore. He'd killed dozens of them. But the human, the weak little mammal that somehow survived 4 days, now seemed like entertainment. "I will bring you its head," Ziktar told his companions through his communicator. "A trophy from a Tier 7 species. Something unusual for my collection." His fellow krill laughed. "Don't hurt yourself hunting such dangerous prey," one mocked. Ziktar didn't respond. He simply activated his tracking system and locked onto the human's heat signature. Jake was checking his snares when he felt something was wrong. The jungle had gone quiet. Birds stopped singing. The usual rustling in the underbrush ceased. In nature, silence meant a predator was near. He grabbed his spear and moved quickly back toward his cave. His instincts, honed by 4 days of constant alertness, screamed at him to hurry. Jake trusted those instincts. He ran. Ziktar saw the human flee and chittered with amusement. So the prey had some awareness. Good. That made it slightly more interesting. He followed at a leisurely pace, his forelegs carrying him effortlessly through the dense vegetation. The human's 2-legged gait seemed clumsy and slow by comparison, but Jake wasn't running to his cave. He was running towards something he'd prepared without really knowing why. Over the past days, he'd noticed large predators use the same paths repeatedly. So he'd created obstacles and hazards along routes leading to his shelter. Not sophisticated traps, just things to slow down or hurt something chasing him. The first trap was a simple tripwire connected to a bent sapling. Ziktar hit it at full speed. The branch whipped around and slammed into his face. It didn't hurt his armored exoskeleton, but it surprised him. He stumbled. The second trap was more dangerous. Jake had dug a shallow pit and covered it with branches and leaves. Ziktar's front leg broke through. He fell forward, confused and angry. How did the prey set traps? The third trap nearly killed him. Jake had positioned sharpened stakes at the bottom of a concealed drop. Ziktar, now moving more carefully but still pursuing, stepped onto what looked like solid ground. The camouflage collapsed. He fell 8 feet onto wooden spears made from thick branches. 2 stakes pierced his thorax. One cracked his leg armor. Ziktar shrieked in pain and rage. He tried to climb out, but the walls were too steep and his injuries too severe. Jake heard the scream and stopped running. He waited, breathing hard, gripping his spear. When nothing appeared after several minutes, he carefully backtracked. He found the krill warrior trapped in the pit, bleeding and furious. The alien was like nothing Jake had seen before. Insect features mixed with reptilian traits. 4 arms, mandibles that clicked aggressively, compound eyes that tracked Jake's every movement with burning hatred. The smart thing would be to leave it there. The merciful thing might be to kill it quickly. Jake did neither. He studied the creature, memorizing its physiology and equipment. Then he climbed down carefully, staying out of reach of those clawed arms. "You came to kill me," Jake said, not expecting the alien to understand. "You thought I'd be easy." Ziktar hissed something in a language Jake couldn't comprehend, but the tone was clear. Threats and fury. Jake ignored the sounds and examined the warrior's equipment. An advanced rifle hung from a shoulder strap. A communicator was attached to the chest armor. Various tools and weapons hung from a belt. Jake took them all, moving quickly and efficiently. He climbed back out of the pit. Ziktar struggled to follow but couldn't. The injuries were too severe. Jake looked down at the trapped hunter one last time. Then he did something that confused even himself. He tossed down his water bottle and a medical gel pack from his survival kit. "You wanted to hunt me for sport," Jake said quietly. "I could kill you right now, but I'm not going to. Think about that while you wait for your friends." He left the krill warrior alive in the pit and retreated to a new location with his prizes. On the monitoring station, chaos erupted. Officers crowded around screens, replaying the footage. Vexler watched it 7 times, his scaled face showing rare emotion. A Tier 7 species just trapped and disarmed a krill warrior, Quentin said in disbelief. "How is that possible?" "I don't know," Vexler admitted. His forked tongue flickered rapidly, a sign of deep concern. "Pull up the human classification files. All of them. Something is very wrong with our data." Across the entertainment networks, viewership exploded. What had started as a forgettable tragedy was now the most watched program in 5 systems. The betting odds on the human survival shifted dramatically. And on dozens of worlds, military analysts began studying the footage with professional interest. Jake Morrison, unaware of his sudden fame, sat in a new hiding spot and examined the alien rifle. It was heavier than he expected, and the grip wasn't designed for human hands. But with some adjustments, he thought he could make it work. The communicator was more immediately useful. He activated it and listened to the chatter. Multiple alien languages mixed together, but the universal translator built into the device converted most of it. That's when Jake learned the truth. He was on a hunting preserve. Multiple alien species used this planet for sport and training. And according to Galactic Council rules, no one would rescue him. He was in neutral space, part of the survival games. Jake sat in the darkness and processed this information. He'd been abandoned by the very civilization that had welcomed humanity into the stars just 50 years ago. Left to die for entertainment. Anger replaced fear in his chest. Cold, focused anger. If the galaxy wanted to watch him struggle and die, he'd disappoint them. He'd survive. And he'd make them regret underestimating what a human could do. When left with no other choice, the prey had just decided to become something else entirely. 2 weeks transformed Jake Morrison in ways he never imagined possible. The frightened survivor who had crawled from the wreckage was gone. In his place stood something harder, sharper, and far more dangerous. He'd moved his base camp 3 times, always staying ahead of potential threats. Each location was carefully chosen for defensive advantages and access to resources. He no longer just survived. He thrived. The stolen rifle from Ziktar proved invaluable. Jake spent hours learning its functions through trial and error. The weapon had multiple power settings and an ammunition counter that showed 42 shots remaining. He practiced on trees and rocks, learning to compensate for the weapon's weight and unusual design. More importantly, the communicator gave him access to the hunter's conversations. Jake listened constantly, learning about the different species on Crevice 7. He learned their locations, their capabilities, and their tactics. Knowledge became his greatest weapon. The entertainment networks had gone insane. Viewership numbers shattered all previous records. Beings from hundreds of worlds tuned in daily to watch the human who refused to die. Some viewers rooted for Jake, others bet against him. All of them watched. On a research station 3 systems away, Dr. Lisa Chun nearly dropped her tablet when she recognized Jake's face on the broadcast. She'd gone to the academy with him years ago. They'd worked together on an engineering project. "That's Jake Morrison," she told her colleagues, "a mix of different alien species. We have to do something. We have to get him out of there." Her supervisor, a tall being with blue skin and 4 eyes, shook his head. "The survival games have strict rules, Dr. Chun. No interference. It's in neutral space. He's a human being, not entertainment." Lisa's voice rose. "The Galactic Council has protocols for situations like this. Those protocols don't apply here," another colleague said. "Besides, look at him. He seems to be managing well enough." Lisa wanted to scream. Managing well enough? Jake was trapped on a death world, hunted by species that saw him as sport. But she was just one xenobiologist in a station full of aliens who didn't understand. Or didn't care. She started making calls. If the Galactic Council wouldn't help, maybe Earth's Defense Coalition would. On Krevat 7, Jake had bigger problems. He'd intercepted a communication that troubled him deeply. A Thorin named Grath had heard about Ziktar's humiliation and was coming to restore the hunter's honor by killing the human. Thorins were massive, standing nearly 8 feet tall with strength that could bend steel. They had thick fur, sharp claws, and enhanced senses. In a direct fight, Jake would lose badly, so he wouldn't fight directly. Jake spent 2 days preparing. He studied Grath's patterns through intercepted communications. The Thorin hunted in the southern valleys, preferring open ground where his strength was an advantage. But there was one place Grath traveled through regularly, a narrow canyon with steep walls. Jake went to that canyon and got to work. He collected every sharp rock he could find. He gathered thick vines. He salvaged more materials from his crashed ship. And he built something that would have impressed any military engineer. The trap was simple in concept, but difficult in execution. Jake loosened rocks at the top of the canyon walls, then connected them to tripwires hidden at ground level. He created multiple trigger points throughout the passage. Then he set up a false trail leading directly through it. When Grath picked up Jake's scent, the Thorin felt confident. The human's tracks were easy to follow. Too easy. But Grath, arrogant and angry, didn't question it. He entered the canyon at a fast pace, eager to catch his prey. Jake watched from a hidden position on the canyon rim. He waited until Grath reached the center of the passage. Then he cut the first support vine with his knife. A ton of rocks cascaded down the cliff face. Grath looked up in surprise, but couldn't move fast enough. Boulders slammed into him from both sides. The Thorin roared in pain and confusion, trying to find shelter that didn't exist. Jake triggered the second trap, then the third. The canyon became a killing zone. By the time the dust settled, Grath lay buried under rubble, unconscious but alive. Jake climbed down and approached carefully. He didn't kill the Thorin. He didn't need to. Instead, he took Grath's equipment, including a much better communicator with encryption capabilities. He also left medical supplies within reach, just like he'd done with Ziktar. "You came hunting me," Jake said to the unconscious alien. "Now you know what happens when you underestimate humans." On the monitoring station, Commander Vexler stood in stunned silence. His officers gathered around the screens, watching the replay. A human, a supposed Tier 7 species, had just taken down a Thorin warrior using nothing but primitive tactics and environmental advantages. "Sir, we need to update the classification," Quennis said urgently. "The human data is clearly wrong." "Very wrong." Vexler nodded slowly. "Send a report to the Galactic Council. Mark it urgent. We may have seriously miscalculated this species." He paused, studying Jake's image on the screen. and get me everything we have on human evolutionary history. I want to know how we missed this." The Galactic Council received the report with mixed reactions. Some species were disturbed. Humans had been dismissed as minor players in galactic civilization, valued more for their artistic and diplomatic skills than any physical capabilities. If that assessment was wrong, it had serious implications. Other species were intrigued. The Drexian military commander watching the feed saw potential. A species that could adapt and overcome despite physical disadvantages might make valuable allies. Or dangerous enemies. Jake, unaware of the political discussions happening light years away, continued his transformation. He'd claimed territory in the Northern Highlands, a region with good visibility and multiple escape routes. His camp was fortified with traps and early warning systems made from salvaged ship parts. He'd also started studying the planet's ecology more seriously. The razorhawks that nested in the cliffs hunted in predictable patterns. The night predators avoided certain plants. The thunder lizards were territorial, but could be redirected with loud noises. Every piece of information added to his survival knowledge. On day 16, Jake encountered his first real test of nerve. A young alien, barely more than a juvenile, wandered into his territory. The being looked similar to the Krill, but smaller and clearly inexperienced. It carried a basic weapon and seemed lost. Jake watched from concealment. He could easily kill or capture the young hunter, but something stopped him. This wasn't the warrior coming to claim glory. This was a kid, probably on its first hunt, who'd gotten separated from its group. He made a decision that surprised even himself. Jake revealed his position, but kept his weapon lowered. The young alien froze in fear, mandibles clicking in distress. Jake pointed toward the eastern ridge and made a shooing motion. "Go home," he said quietly. "You don't belong here." The young hunter stared at him for a long moment, then fled. Jake let it go. On the monitoring station, that moment was replayed dozens of times. Analysts argued about Jake's motivation. Some said it was strategic, avoiding unnecessary conflict. Others suggested it showed human capacity for mercy, even in extreme circumstances. Wexler thought it was something else entirely. The human was setting rules, creating boundaries, deciding who lived and who died based on threat assessment rather than fear. That night, 3 more hunting parties requested emergency evacuation from Crevasse 7. They cited unexpected dangerous conditions. The truth was simpler. They were afraid of the human. Jake sat at his camp, cleaning his weapons and reviewing his supplies. He'd been on this planet for 17 days. 17 days of constant alertness, of adapting to threats, of becoming something he'd never planned to be. He thought about his dead crewmates, about Captain Rodriguez, who tried to save everyone, about the people he'd never see again if rescue didn't come. The grief was still there, sharp and painful, but it had transformed into something else too. Determination, purpose. The galaxy had left him here to die. Instead, he was learning to live. And in doing so, he was teaching them something they should have known from the start. Humans didn't survive by being the strongest or fastest. They survived by being the most adaptable, the most persistent, and the most unwilling to give up. Jake Morrison was no longer prey. He was becoming the apex predator, and the hunt had just begun. News of Jake Morrison spread far beyond simple entertainment circles. Military academies across 36 worlds now studied footage of his tactics. Xenobiologists debated human capabilities in heated arguments, and politicians in the Galactic Council chambers nervously discussed what this situation revealed about their first contact. Protocols. Captain Ben Hayes of the Earth, Defense Coalition vessel Pioneer, received the intelligence report while his ship was on patrol near the frontier. He read it twice, then called his bridge crew together. "We're changing course. he announced. Heading for Crevasse 7, maximum speed. His first officer, a woman named Kate Sullivan, looked concerned. Sir, that's 3 weeks away at best. And it's in neutral space. The Galactic Council won't like us interfering with the survival games. I don't care what they like, Ben said flatly. One of our people is trapped on a death world while aliens watch for entertainment. We're getting him out. File the course change and prepare a formal complaint against the Council for negligent endangerment of a protected species citizen. The Pioneer changed direction and accelerated. But 3 weeks was a long time. A lot could happen in 3 weeks. On Crevasse 7, Jake had evolved his survival strategy into something approaching military operations. His territory in the Northern Highlands was now a fortress. Multiple observation posts gave him views of all approaches. Cached supplies were hidden in 3 different locations. Escape routes were planned and practiced daily. He'd also become something the other hunters feared. In 3 weeks, Jake had disabled or captured 6 different aliens. He never killed unless absolutely necessary, but his traps and tactics were devastating. More importantly, he'd started psychological warfare, using the advanced communicator he'd taken from Grath. Jake broadcast messages to the other hunters. Simple messages, warnings about areas he controlled, notifications when he was tracking someone, sometimes just static that indicated he was listening to their conversations. The hunters, used to being predators, found themselves looking over their shoulders constantly. The jungle that had been their playground became a place of uncertainty. And at the center of that uncertainty was a human who refused to act like prey. Dr. Lisa Chun, still fighting bureaucracy at her research station, had become something of a celebrity in human space. She'd leaked footage of Jake's situation to colonial networks, and the response was immediate and angry. Humanity, generally peaceful in galactic affairs, discovered something about themselves. They didn't like seeing one of their own left to die for entertainment. Protests erupted on human worlds. Diplomatic channels burned with furious messages. 3 more coalition vessels diverted course toward Crevasse 7, Earth's. Government formally demanded Jake's immediate rescue and filed complaints against every species involved in the survival games. The Galactic Council tried to maintain their position of neutrality, but the pressure was mounting. Humans were economically important and, as Jake was proving, potentially dangerous if provoked. On day 21, Jake made his first kill. It wasn't planned. It wasn't wanted. But it became necessary. A Drexian hunter named Scarvin had been tracking Jake for 4 days. Unlike the others, Scarvin was patient and intelligent. He avoided Jake's traps, moved silently through the jungle, and waited for mistakes. When Jake went to check a water source, Scarvin ambushed him. The fight was brutal and close. Scarvin had speed, claws, and venom. Jake had desperation and a sharp piece of metal. They struggled in the mud near the stream, neither able to gain advantage. Scarvin's claws raked across Jake's chest, tearing through his makeshift armor. Jake drove his blade into the Drexian's throat. They both fell, bleeding and exhausted. Scarvin died first. Jake lay next to him, gasping, feeling the venom burn through his veins. He'd been scratched badly. The medical kit back at camp had antivenom for local creatures, but he didn't know if it would work on alien toxins. Jake forced himself to stand. He stumbled back to camp, leaving a trail of blood. Every step was agony. The world spun. His vision blurred. But he kept moving because stopping meant death. He reached his camp and collapsed. Hands shaking, he injected himself with 3 different anti-venom compounds and antibiotics from his supplies. Then he wrapped his wounds and passed out, not knowing if he'd wake up. Commander Vexlor watched the footage with grim fascination. "The human is injured," he observed. "Possibly fatally." Should we intervene now? Quentis hesitated. Sir, the Council orders still say no interference. The Council is about to have a war with humanity on their hands, Vexler said. I've been reading the reports. Humans are mobilizing. Not just their military. Their civilians are organizing protests. Their diplomatic corps is making threats. All for one individual. He turned to face his assistant. Do you understand what that means? That they're emotional? Quentis suggested. That they're loyal, Vexler corrected. Dangerously loyal. They're willing to fight the entire Galactic Council for one of their own. We've underestimated them in every way possible. Jake woke up 18 hours later. He was alive, which surprised him. His chest was wrapped in bloody bandages and hurt with every breath, but the venom had been neutralized. The improvised antitoxins had worked. He stayed in camp for 2 days, recovering. During that time, he listened to the communicator and learned something important. The Zalthern Collective, embarrassed that their attack had created this situation, had hired elite mercenaries to finish him off. A unit called the Phantom Claws, led by a legendary hunter named Kexvor. Jake had 3 days before they arrived. 3 days to prepare for the best hunters in the galaxy. God, he spent those days working despite his injuries. He reinforced his defenses. He created new traps in the deep jungle. He cached weapons in multiple locations. And he studied every piece of information he could find about the Phantom Claws through intercepted files. They were good. Very good. Kexvor had hunted on 40 worlds and never failed a contract. His team was made up of specialists from different species, each bringing unique skills. They had military-grade equipment and decades of experience. Jake's advantages were different. He knew the terrain. He'd been adapting to this world for 3 weeks. He understood how to use the environment. And he had something the Phantom Claws didn't expect, a human's capacity for endurance. On a monitoring station, analysts from multiple species gathered to watch what would happen next. Bets were placed. Some gave Jake a 5% chance of survival. Most gave him less. Dr. Lisa Chun, watching from her research station, refused to bet. She just prayed silently that Jake would survive long enough for rescue to arrive. The Pioneer was still 2 weeks away. Captain Hayes pushed his engines beyond recommended limits, but physics had limits of its own. Space was vast and ships could only go so fast. Come on, Jake, Kate Sullivan whispered as she watched the latest broadcast. Just stay alive. We're coming. Jake sat in his fortified camp and checked his weapons one last time. The rifle had 38 shots left. His plasma pistol still had 3 charges. He had knives, spears, and traps scattered throughout his territory. It wasn't enough to face elite hunters in direct combat. But Jake had no intention of fighting directly. He'd watched recordings of Kexvor's previous hunts through stolen files. The mercenary was skilled, but followed patterns. He approached each hunt like a military operation. Reconnaissance, planning, execution. It was professional and effective. But Jake had learned something in 3 weeks on this death world. Professional hunters expected prey to act like prey. They expected panic, mistakes, desperation. They didn't expect prey to hunt back. The Phantom Claw ship entered orbit on day 24. Jake watched the sky and smiled grimly. Let them come. The galaxy wanted entertainment. It'd give them a show they'd never forget. The scared refugee who'd crawled from the crashed ship was gone. The grieving crewmate who'd buried his friends was gone. In their place stood Jake Morrison, who'd learned the hardest lesson of all, that survival required becoming something you never wanted to be. The apex predator was ready, and the final hunt was about to begin. The Phantom Claws landed in a clearing 5 miles from Jake's last known position. Kexvor emerged from the ship first, a tall being covered in dark scales with 4 arms and eyes that saw in multiple spectrums. Behind him came 5 specialists, each chosen for their unique skills. "Standard protocol," Kexfer instructed his team. "Reconnaissance for 6 hours, then we move. The target is injured and alone. This should be quick." His second-in-command, a muscular alien named Drek, checked his scanner. Heat signature detected in the northern highlands. Probable camp location. Kexver studied the terrain data. He's fortified a position. Smart for a Tier 7, but it won't matter. We'll approach from multiple directions and overwhelm his defenses. Questions? No one spoke. The phantom claws had hunted far more dangerous prey than a single human. They moved out with professional efficiency. Jake watched them from 3 miles away through stolen optics. He'd expected them to land near his camp and was pleased to be wrong. They'd chosen a different approach vector, which meant they were being cautious. Good. Cautious meant predictable. He wasn't at his camp anymore. That location had served its purpose, but staying there would be suicide. Instead, Jake had prepared something else. A route through the deepest part of the jungle. Through terrain he'd spent 3 weeks learning intimately. The phantom claws would track him. They'd follow his trail. And that trail would lead them exactly where Jake wanted them to go. He moved quietly through the undergrowth, leaving signs that were obvious to trained hunters, but looked accidental. A broken branch here, a footprint there, traces of his passage that said, "Human went this way," without being too obvious. Kex, single quotes, VOR, found the first signs within an hour. "He's moving east," he told his team, "abandoning his camp. Probably trying to evade us. Should we split up?" Drek asked. "No, stay together. The human has proven resourceful. No unnecessary risks." Kexfer had reviewed all footage of Jake's previous encounters. He wouldn't underestimate this prey like the others had, but Kexfer made one critical error. He saw Jake's tactics and tools and intelligence. He just didn't understand what they represented. He thought he was hunting a clever prey animal. He didn't realize he was chasing a human who'd been pushed beyond all limits. The chase lasted 5 days. Jake led them deeper into the jungle, into areas where the vegetation was thick and visibility was poor. He slept in short bursts, always moving, always staying ahead. The phantom claws followed with grim determination. On day 2, they lost their first member. The tracker, an alien with enhanced senses, stepped into a snare that yanked him 30 feet into the air. While suspended, he was attacked by razorhawks that Jake had deliberately disturbed. The team had to cut him down and medevac him to their ship. "The human planned that," Kexver said with grudging respect. "He's using the local predators as weapons." On day 3, 2 more team members fell. One to a pit trap hidden under leaves. Another to an infection from contaminated water that Jake had made look safe. Both were serious injuries that required evacuation. Drek looked nervous. "Commander, we're down to 3. Should we call for backup?" Kexver's pride wouldn't allow it. "No, we're Phantom Claws. We finish contracts." But doubt had entered his mind. This wasn't a normal hunt anymore. On day 4, Jake stopped running. He'd reached his chosen battleground, a section of jungle near a cliff face where underground water created a natural maze of caves and tunnels. He'd explored this area a week ago and memorized every passage. The phantom claws approached cautiously. Kexver's sensors indicated the human had stopped moving. "He's cornered himself," the commander said. "Final approach." Stay alert, they entered the cave system in formation. What they didn't know was that Jake wasn't cornered. He'd chosen this place specifically because it negated their technological advantages. Their sensors bounced off cave walls, giving false readings. Their superior numbers meant nothing in narrow passages. and their advanced weapons were dangerous to use where one mistake could cause a cave-in. Jake moved through tunnels he'd memorized in complete darkness. He heard the phantom claws calling to each other, their voices echoing confusingly. He struck quickly, and Vanishedrek went down first, clubbed unconscious from behind in a narrow passage. Jake took his weapon and disappeared before the others could react. Another specialist fell to a tripwire that brought rocks cascading down, blocking the tunnel and separating him from his team. Jake didn't kill him, just left him trapped and moved on. That left Kexfer alone. The legendary hunter found himself in a dark cave, hunting a prey that had become a predator. Every shadow could hide the human. Every sound could be a trap. For the first time in his career, Kexfer felt fear. He stumbled out of the caves after 8 hours, exhausted and desperate. Jake was waiting, not to attack, just to be seen. The two beings stood 50 feet apart in the early morning light. Kexfer looked at the human and finally understood. This wasn't about strength or technology. Jake had simply outlasted them. His two-legged endurance, his ability to function on minimal sleep, his persistence in terrain that exhausted everyone else. These were the advantages that mattered. "I surrender," Kexfer said, dropping his weapon. It was the first time he'd ever spoken those words. Jake nodded slowly. He was filthy, injured, and exhausted beyond measure. But he was still standing. "Go home," he said quietly. "Tell them what happens when they underestimate humans up in orbit." The Pioneer dropped out of faster-than-light travel. Captain Ben Hayes immediately opened communication with the monitoring station. "This is Captain Hayes of the Earth Defense Coalition. I'm here to retrieve Jake Morrison. I strongly suggest no one tries to stop me." Commander Vexler, who'd watched the entire hunt with growing horror, responded immediately. "No one will interfere, Captain. Your man has earned his freedom several times over. I'll provide his coordinates within an hour." A shuttle descended to the planet's surface. Jake watched it land with emotions he couldn't quite name. Relief, exhaustion, grief for his dead crew finally hitting him fully. And something else. Pride, maybe? Or just the satisfaction of proving everyone wrong. Dr. Lisa Chun was on that shuttle. She'd pulled strings and made threats to be included in the rescue mission. When she saw Jake, she rushed forward and hugged him, not caring about the dirt and blood. "You made it," she said, tears in her eyes. "Jake, you actually made." "I didn't have a choice," he replied simply back on the Pioneer. Medical staff treated Jake's injuries while Captain Hayes debriefed him. The story spread quickly through human space and beyond. Jake Morrison, sole survivor, who'd been left for dead and instead became a legend. The Galactic Council faced intense scrutiny. Their classification system was revealed as dangerously flawed. Humans weren't Tier 7. They weren't weak prey animals that could be dismissed. They were something far more dangerous, a species that adapted, endured, and refused to give up even when every logical prediction said they should within a month. Human classification was updated to Tier 2 with a special designation, Persistence Apex Predator. Military academies included Jake's tactics in their curriculum. First contact protocols were revised. And no one ever underestimated humanity again. Jake returned to Earth a hero. Parades, medals, offers for books and movies. But none of it felt real. What felt real were the quiet moments when he remembered his dead crew. When he woke up at night, still listening for predators. When he caught himself planning escape routes in safe buildings. 6 months after his rescue, Jake joined the Coalition military as a survival instructor. He taught soldiers things he'd learned on Krevat 7, not just tactics, but mindset. The understanding that humans survived not by being the strongest or fastest, but by being the most adaptable and persistent. Commander Vexler resigned from the Galactic Council, troubled by what he'd witnessed. He opened a private investigation into how badly first contact protocols had failed across multiple species. His report would eventually lead to major reforms. Lisa Chun published a paper on human evolutionary advantages that changed xenobiology forever. Her work showed that Earth's hostile environment had created a species uniquely suited for adaptation and survival. Humans were endurance hunters who'd evolved to chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. They were problem solvers who used intelligence to overcome physical limitations. They were social creatures whose loyalty to each other bordered on the irrational. The survival games of Crevice 7 were permanently shut down. The planet became a nature preserve, close to hunting. And across the galaxy, beings watched the footage of Jake Morrison's survival with new understanding. Humanity had been underestimated. One man, left alone on a death world, had shown the entire galaxy what humans could become when pushed to their absolute limits. Not through strength or technology, but through persistence, adaptability, and an absolute refusal to give up. Jake Morrison had become the apex predator. And in doing so, he changed how the universe saw his entire species on quiet nights. Jake sometimes thought about Crevice 7, not with horror, but with a complex mixture of emotions. That planet had taken his crew and nearly killed him. But it had also revealed something fundamental about humanity that even they hadn't fully understood. When prey refuses to be prey, when survival becomes an act of defiance, when a species shows that they will adapt to anything rather than surrender to it,